Evening. Thanks everyone for joining us on our weekly AJA Zoom event. My name is Robert Gregory, and also on the screen we have Dr. David Adler, President of the AJA. As usual, if you'd like to ask a question, raise your hand with the reaction function. Written questions can also be placed in the chat function, and if we have a chance, we may get to some. As David mentioned, tonight we've got a special format whereby we'll have a 15-minute update from Israel first, and then we'll go to our main topic. So I'll introduce the main topic after we've had the update. So first, our guest tonight for the update is Channel 14 star news anchor Lital Shemesh, all the way from Israel. Lital spoke to AJA when she last visited Australia, and she was excellent. So it's a real pleasure to have her back. Over to you, Lital.
Lital, thank you for joining us again. There has been what has been a dramatic issue about certain photojournalists embedded with Hamas. Can you tell us a little about that and the reaction in Israel?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining this conversation. I also want to say that I've invited to this conversation my friend Daniel Seaman. He was the head of the government press office for over a decade, and he could also share some light about the situation with the foreign journalists. So yes, David, as you mentioned, there was a huge commotion in Israel around this investigative report by Honest Reporting website showing foreign journalists from Gaza, journalists who were working for CNN, for Reuters, for AP, literally taking pictures and videos of the slaughter of the 7th of October massacre doing that live. So you can see them in the background of pictures, taking pictures of the Nukhba Hamas terrorist capturing an old lady on a motorcycle, and in the background you can see the journalists taking footage, taking pictures. You could see one CNN reporter, an Arab reporter from Gaza, sitting with the terrorist on a motorcycle, holding a hand grenade in his hand, driving to the scene. So us in Israel are asking ourselves, first of all, whether those journalists were informed pre-hand about the attack, and also how can a journalist stand from the side, stand aside and not do anything when he's seeing people being captured. So at the moment, there's a big debate in Israel about what to do with these people. If you're asking me, they need to be captured. They need to be investigated by the Shin Bet, by the Israeli Secret Service, about their involvement in these attacks. And also, we got the weakest response from CNN and Reuters, saying something along the line of, these people were freelance, they were self-employed, we don't know about their involvement. And I think if you want to see a different media outlets that are really covering things from the ground, showing you the truth, they cannot stay silent when they see their journalist participating in these atrocities.
Lital, I can't recall which member of the Knesset said it. It might have been Danny Danon. I'm not certain that a journalist who is embedded with Hamas should be treated like a Hamas member and hunted down and killed by the IDF. Is that the Israel policy now?
So we don't know what's the Israeli policy about these journalists, but I can tell you that our secret service, our intelligence units are basically targeting all the different cell phones and all the different pictures of the people who were in the attack. So I don't know if they put them on the list or not, but I think the first thing that needs to be done is to arrest these people immediately and investigate them and try and figure out whether they knew beforehand about the attack. Because even when you're a journalist, you're a human being. You're a human being before you're a journalist. And I don't know any people who can stand aside with these things is happening right in front of their eyes.
Yeah. Maybe we should ask Danny if he's got anything to add. And particularly, Danny, what I'd like to ask you is, there is a legitimate role for journalists in conflicts. The role of war journalists is something that is well documented, and history is full of records that have been obtained by war journalists. What do you see as crossing the line here?
I could go into this for hours. I dealt with this over 20 years ago. I think the essence of the problem lies in the fact that we're applying Western values and standards to societies who don't share those values. And the same media organizations, AP, Reuters, BBC, CNN, anybody, it's fine that they use it. They need to get the access. But in these societies, and by the way, it's not only the terrorist entities. It can be Jordan and Egypt and Syria as well. These countries do not have democratic values, do not share that. Anybody employed there who is not a foreigner, or they call these freelance workers, if they don't have the okay of the authorities, be it a terrorist entity or an Arab regime, they can't work for them. So you have to take it in advance. Now, if the foreigners want to do that, that's fine. But the problem is that they're not informing you or us. They have to let us know that what are the conditions in which they are employing these people. They don't share that information with us. What they do is give us the impression that these are journalists upholding their standards, meaning Western journalist standards, and working according to the guidelines of these Western media. And that's not what's happening. They're actually, you call it shrills, but they're employed by the terrorist entities. Now, you had another aspect over the years that every time we're accused by it, not only the media organizations, but these organizations for the defense of media, the ICPJ, the Committee for Protection of Journalists, etc. And they tell us that we killed ABC, these different Arabs working for employed by the foreign media. And later on, it can be the Islamic Jihad, the PLO, Hamas, Hezbollah will post pictures of their losses, among them these particular individuals holding weapons, having all the berets and everything that their own terrorists have. So they're not hiding it. Who's ignoring this fact are the Western media. And in this, they're violating their principles and they're lying to the public.
I think the honest reporting work, and by the way, we've had them as guests twice. They do some outstanding work. That has had an impact internationally. People are generally aware that something inappropriate was happening. Can I ask both of you to comment on how you think the conflict has been reported in the international media generally? How much is the bias a problem for Israel?
I think, David, that's an excellent question. That's an excellent question, because for many years we were suffering from bad coverage from different media outlets like BBC, like CNN, the European Sky News, not the Australian one, but the European one. For many years, they were obsessed with Israel. The international media was obsessed with Israel. Every day you open the New York Times, the Washington Post, you'll see an item about Israel. And usually the coverage would be completely misleading or completely wrong, showing you a false picture of what really happened on the ground for so many years. And someone would think that in this amount of scale of terror attack, you know, the biggest terror attack we've seen in so many years, of 1,200 people being innocent civilian being murdered, everything was out there, you know, all the footage, all the videos, it was there for the entire world to see with their own eyes what Hamas terrorists did to our people. And someone would think that the international media would wake up and understand what we're dealing with. But time and again, I'm going through CNN, I'm going through BBC, I'm seeing what they're publishing. BBC won't even call Hamas a terror organization. They won't even call them terrorists. So I'm thinking, you know, I'm saying to myself, for many years, we blamed ourselves for not having a good PR, for not doing a great advocacy, for being outnumbered by Muslims around the world who are, you know, outnumbering us with putting lies out there. But when you see such a great scale of event, when the entire world is watching closely and seeing with their own eyes, and the media outlet is still questioning Israel and questioning Israel's actions in Gaza, I don't see any other answer than anti-Semitism. This is purely anti-Semitism, to justify the murder of Jews, to justify the killing of Jews. I don't think there was any terror attack around the world when the world actually blame the victims. I don't know any other country who wouldn't go on such a large-scale operation to eliminate the threat, to defend its own civilians. And I think also the diaspora Jews needs to speak up against it, needs to go and demonstrate, needs to put up petitions against the coverage of Israel in England, in America, because I think it's a disgrace.
We have a big problem with the public broadcaster here, the ABC, which is often as bad, if not worse, than the BBC. Danny, there was that well-known case of immediately Israel was blamed for bombing a hospital when, firstly, it wasn't the hospital bombed and it wasn't Israel. What happened then that the media coverage went so off the rails so quickly? Danny, you're muted for some reason. You need to unmute.
Yeah, because I...
Okay.
We act as if every time something happens, like the 7th of October was new. It's a new chapter in a television series. And that's not what's happening here. We have an ongoing historical situation here, and the media have been covering it very intensely. Up until about 10 years ago, we had more media covering Israel than any place else in the world, sometimes figuratively, other times it's per capita, but certainly exaggerated coverage of this area. And so they know what's going on. And it's not like we didn't have incidents like the hospital happen before. And here again goes the behavior of the journalists, which one would expect that they, having been here, having experienced these kind of things, hold on a minute, check for it. There has never been an incident in which Israel was accused of doing something wrong, in which it didn't turn out later that the Israeli version was accurate and correct. The other side lied. The journalists spread those lies and then didn't do a lot to correct it. So you would expect them now to apply the same kind of standards they do to everything else. But Israel is always questioned. Israel is always suspect. Israel is always second guessed when our reports eventually come out to be the truth. So when you have that, not once, not twice, every time, you would expect over years that these journalists would at least be cautious and do the job. Again, it's not, they owe it to us. They're the fourth estate in a democracy. They're supposed to be providing the public with information so that we can reach our own conclusions. And they're not doing that. They're trying to divert it. And by the way, I wrote a book of my experience. It was just published in Cambridge Publishing. It's called Israel and the Foreign Media. They refused to give the title I wanted, which was that this is the cradle of fake news, not only the cradle of the three monotheistic religions, but fake news started here with the horrible coverage of the foreign press. And I think that summarizes it all, so we know what we're dealing with.
Well, I'm very disciplined with time, and our 15-minute little update has expired. Lital, thank you so much for joining us again. You're a great friend of AJA. And Danny, Lital's taken the liberty of giving me your contact details. And so you can expect an invitation. We'll do a proper program event with you on Israel in the media if you're happy to do that on another week in this time slot.
Anytime, my pleasure.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for your support and all the good work that you're doing for Israel.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Lital. Excellent, as usual. Now, I'm going to introduce our next part of the evening. We have Julie Hartman, and want to welcome her. I think it's very early in her time. Not sure exactly where she is, but I'm sure it's very early time to be up. As an open-minded 22-year-old graduate of Harvard, Julie became a conservative after discovering Dennis Prager's radio show. After reaching out to Dennis to express her appreciation for his work, a friendship was born that's now become a mentorship. Dennis invited her as a guest on his radio show, and the following summer she appeared as a weekly on-air contributor to his nationally syndicated radio program. At the age of 21, Julie guest hosted 3-hour broadcasts for both the Dennis Prager Show and the Mike Gallagher Show, becoming the youngest person to solo substitute host on a national program. This is in the United States. On Timeless, Julie explores her views on life, politics, and current events. And it's obviously a lot of current events we'd like to discuss with Julie and her views and what young people are thinking. So over to you, David.
Thank you so much. And Julie, you might be a little bit surprised that the people you were dealing with, Alan Friedman in particular, is not hosting tonight. His internet crashed and he hasn't been able to restore it, but he's given me his notes and his points, so we'll press ahead. And firstly, thank you so much for joining us, and also I think a mutual friend, Robert Wheel, was involved in getting you to join us. Is that right?
That is right. Robert was or is a listener of Dennis and Julie, and has been a listener of Dennis Prager's radio show, and he's become a dear friend, he and his wife Adele. So I want to thank him. I don't know where he is. I'm trying to find him amidst this hodgepodge of Zoom faces, but yes, I want to thank Robert and Adele for introducing me to this group.
Okay, well,
Robert as well, yeah, from us.
You're talking to the leading centre-right conservative Jewish organisation in Australia, by far. Now, you're obviously not Jewish, but you've teamed up with a guy who is proudly Jewish. You've been to some Shabbat dinners at his place, probably quite a number. The contact with Jewish culture and values, has that had any influence or impact on you?
Oh, of course. This is going to seem very rehearsed, and I promise you that it isn't. But as we were hearing the update on Israel, I looked to my right, and I didn't plant this here, but I have the Torah here on my desk. I woke up this morning. Well, it's 1:20 in the morning here in Los Angeles, but so I suppose yesterday morning, and I was catching up on my Torah reading. So it shows you so much that the influence that Dennis has had on me, and Jewish history, tradition, thought. It's been such a great addition to my life. I grew up in a secular household, nominally Catholic, but really we didn't go to church. My parents are traditional and they raised me with Judeo-Christian values, but they didn't overtly tell me that they were Judeo-Christian values. So really through Dennis, I've had the joy of reading the Torah, his commentary. I've also been to Israel, I want to add, and that was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I went in March of 2022 when I was a senior in college. And because of that trip, I feel such an emotional tie to the place, and I feel equipped to defend Israel during this time, which so needs it from especially Gentiles
100%.
like me. And the final thing I'll say, hopefully this is taken in the spirit that it's intended, is that I'm such a regular at Dennis's Shabbat dinners. They're just a joy every Friday night. I look forward to them, that they've started calling me Julie, Jewlie, because of my love and reverence for Jewish culture. So feel free to call me that tonight if you would like to.
I think I'll stick with ordinary Julie, but it's a good nickname, and it's a nickname you can be proud of. So what are your impressions of what happened on October 7? What were your first thoughts when you found out about it and saw what unfolded?
Oh gosh, it's one of those days that all of us will remember. And first of all, I just want to acknowledge that I'm so sorry I especially want to say that to a Jewish audience. I'm sure that many of you have friends and family members who are in Israel. I gather that some of you are in Israel now, and I so hope that you and your loved ones are staying safe and are doing as well as possible, even if you're not in Israel. I mean, just reading about the explosion of anti-Semitism all around the world, especially in Sydney, has been disheartening, to put it lightly. So I want to start off by saying that. But I will always remember the morning of October 7th. I came downstairs in the morning, and my parents had CNN on. And at that point, the death toll was at 70, which is already staggering. But of course, compared to what it is now, it was the beginning, the first act, if you will, of the unfolding tragedy. And I remember just sitting there and looking at the TV and going, how could this happen? 70 people have been killed. And at that point, I think there were 10 hostages that were speculated to have been kidnapped. And so I immediately started writing down what was unfolding, because I knew that this was a day that would change the world. But like so many of us, I was stunned. And I have to be honest that when I was hearing on October 7th, and when I continue to hear people talk about an Israeli intelligence failure, that is certainly true. I mean, clearly there was a massive failure, but I would like to put out the possibility that there might have been an intelligence penetration. Are Mossad and Shin Bet somehow immune from harboring a Richard Hansen? Richard Hansen was a Soviet spy who I believe was either in the CIA or the FBI here in the United States. You know, I think that we're sort of, I'm trying to consider all possibilities and all angles. And I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm sure many of you have considered it already, but I have to admit that was one of my first thoughts, that this, an event of this magnitude, in my opinion, was likely not just a failure, but also a penetration of intelligence.
Fascinating. You're right in your observation that two things, that many of us have connections, obviously, to Israel in general, friends and family, but also to the specific event. I lost a cousin, a young woman who was at the Supernova Music Festival, one of the 266 bodies that was found in the festival area. And I haven't been able to bring myself to inquire as to the detail. I just hope that she was killed quickly and didn't have to suffer some of the horrendous things that we hear that Hamas did to young women. And what you saw about anti-Semitism in Sydney, and particularly those chants at the Opera House, that was our organisation exposing it. We had a young guy there incognito with his mobile phone making a record, and then the next day we started pushing it out. So you can tell, if that subject arises in the US, that you've been speaking to the people who were actually involved in bringing that information to the world. But Julie, we hear that within your generation, on US college campuses and elsewhere, there's quite the opposite reaction. There seems to be almost an irrational aggression towards Israel, you know, an acceptance that Hamas's actions might have been justified. What on earth is going on the college campuses?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I could spend hours on this. I was so disheartened, again, to put it mildly, to see the petition come out of my alma mater within hours or just a day of
That's
the October.
Harvard. You were at Harvard?
Attack.
Yeah.
Yes, at Harvard, holding the, quote, Israeli regime entirely responsible for the violence. You know, I'll answer this in two parts. The first is, and by the way, I shameless plug for my show Timeless, but this is seriously an appropriate shout out. I think on the episode 1 or 2 days ago, I exposed a curriculum that a 9th grader here in California, my home state, sent to me of the new ethnic studies curriculum that he is being taught. The state of California is the first state in the union to mandate that ethnic studies be taught in high schools in order for you to get a high school diploma. And looking at this curriculum, and by the way, it was so scary because the student said to me, please keep my name anonymous. Please keep the name of my school anonymous. Please blur out the names of my teachers, on any slides. I don't want this traced back to me. I could get in trouble. What a terrible thing that a student is afraid to send a curriculum of something that he is learning in classes that are being funded by our taxpayer money. But once I looked at it, I could see why he was so afraid to send it to me and to have me expose it. And I know your question is about college campuses, but this starts in high school, and much of the things that are being taught in high school are being reflected in college. And on one of the slides, and again, I encourage you to check out the episode. I think it's called Woke Indoctrination Exposed. They're teaching these students intersectionality, and which is this, I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's this, I honestly can't even explain it. It's so nonsensical to me. It's like that you have these multiple identities depending on your gender, your race, your religion, your sexuality, and they all kind of intersect to form who you are and how oppressed or privileged you may be. And there was literally a chart of this model of intersectionality, and Beyonce, the American singer, was at the center, and the teacher labeled, woman Black. That means these are the categories that indicate that she's oppressed. And then on the other side, it was like rich, heterosexual, and something else that I'm forgetting. And then those were the categories that indicate that she is privileged. And when I saw that slide, I immediately understood it. And that is that in the United States and around the world, really in the West, there has come to be this understanding that you can classify oppressors and oppressed into categories. And no matter what happens, no matter who, if someone commits the most egregious action, if they fall into this contrived oppressed category, then they are protected. So then we look at what happened on October 7th, and this is sludge that has been thrown at students for years and years and years, and they have so assimilated it into their mentality that they see Israel being attacked, and they don't judge it like regular moral human beings and go, okay, these are the victims. The Israelis are the victims. Because there was a terrorist attack against them where people were raped, mutilated, and slaughtered. They look at it and they go, oh, well, Israelis, in their view, they view Israelis as white. Now, I know that half of the Israeli population is not white, so just shows you even more of the problems that a lot of this is based on ignorance and falsehoods. But they view Israelis as white. They view Israelis as Western. They view Israelis as privileged. And then, so accordingly, Israelis are somehow responsible. And Hamas, because they are non-white, they are Muslim, they are from a territory which is not as advanced and developed as Israel, then they deserve our undivided sympathy. That's the first part of my answer. And quickly, I'll just add something else, that there has been so much moral confusion about a variety of issues that have been allowed to spread. And I have to admit that it's been very frustrating for me to see pro-Israel left-wing Americans, both Jewish and non-Jewish, express how surprised they were at the anti-Semitism on college campuses. My question for them is, really? And the other thing that I would say to them is that many of you have supported this moral confusion. They have allowed and encouraged lies to be spread about America. America has been called a colonial state, a systemically racist state, and now they're surprised that these same individuals are calling Israel an apartheid state. They have allowed moral confusion to spread about race with radical gender ideologies, and And again, now they're surprised that further moral confusion has permeated. And so I think all of this wokeism, all of this radicalism, even if it doesn't pertain specifically to Israel, they're all kind of pieces of the same puzzle. And every time a student or a teacher or a donor or a Democrat voter acquiesced to an absurd temper tantrum by a woke college student, again, it doesn't really even matter the issue. If they acquiesced to that woke temper tantrum, they laid a brick in the now massive edifice of extremism and entitlement that they are so lamenting.
Yeah. Look, I think there's a lot of truth in that, and we see much of the same trends here, Julie. Tell me, how do you think the Biden administration has handled it? I know that we won't talk about the period prior to the 7th of October because there is so much that you could say, but from the 7th of October onwards, what's your assessment of the Biden administration, specifically with regard to the events in Israel?
Look, I am no friend, or no fan, I should say, and certainly no friend of President Biden, but I have to give credit where credit is due. I thought that he gave a great speech on October 7th, or perhaps it was October 8th, or, within 24 hours of the massacre, condemning Hamas, voicing American support for Israel. I thought that was a very powerful and important speech. I appreciated that he flew over to Israel, hugged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. That was something that, again, a lot of people criticized President Biden for doing, but I thought that it was a good display of American support for Israel. Obviously, sending, certain weaponry, financial aid to Israel, I support. The thing, though, and I hear your question, and I will not talk about his actions prior to October 7th, but of course, I have a lot of issues because I believe that he, in part, look, he can't be entirely blamed. No matter how much I despise the man, it would be unfair to say that he is totally responsible for what happened. But American weakness, coupled with aid to Gaza, and on top of that, unfreezing $6 billion to the Iranian genocidal regime was not great. But the thing that really does concern me is seeing over the past few days, the Biden administration's hinting at what they would want a post-war Gaza governance to look like. Our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, has said that he would support having the Palestinian Authority come back to Gaza. The Secretary General, I believe is the correct title, perhaps I'm wrong on that, of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, has also said that the Palestinian Authority might be willing. President Biden has talked about a two-state solution. And obviously, if things, if I could wave a magic wand and have my perfect scenario, these things would seem attractive and viable. But it just, in my opinion, shows a ignorance about what really is a realistic outcome for this. I mean, does President Biden not know what happened in 2005 and 2006 and 2007 with Hamas kicking out the Palestinian Authority from Gaza? So again, maybe in the first few weeks of the October 7th attack, I've been fine with President Biden's response, but there is nothing that gives me any indication or hope that he or the members of his administration are equipped to really help Israel find a good solution and path forward after the war in Gaza is over.
Now, the US is starting to head towards the next presidential election. Will this be an election issue? And particularly if Donald Trump is confirmed as the Republican candidate, putting the legal actions aside for a moment, there is a big difference in attitude between Joe Biden and Donald Trump when it comes to the Middle East. Do you see it as being a real issue, or will it just flip to domestic issues as things get closer?
It depends. If we have a recession between now and then, and by all indications, it seems that we are barreling towards a recession, then I think that the economic state of our country will probably be the primary issue that people are voting on. But with regard to Israel, it will just really depend on how this war unfolds in the next 360 or perhaps less days. Right now, what is it? It's November 15th, and our election is next year on November 5th. So we have under a year between now and then. And, you know, what's interesting, I was actually just reading an analysis of this in the Wall Street Journal, is that President Biden's support of Israel has been one of the most popular, universally popular things that he has done throughout his presidency. Of course, there is a massive younger contingent in the United States, which is vehemently anti-Israel and pro-Hamas for crazy reasons. They're brainwashed, as we've discussed. But most Americans, as it stands right now, on Democrats and Republicans, do support Israel. So I think between now and then, if President Biden can kind of maintain the status quo and prevent this conflict from spinning out of control, then I think, although I would totally disagree with them, that the American populace would be inclined to
just move on,
keep him in power.
Yeah.
But if this does spin out of control, and a lot can happen in the next year, then I think that it will go to the favor of Donald Trump, who was, I think, extraordinary on his handling of the Middle East, primarily with the Abraham Accords.
100%. Okay, I'm going to do our just 1 minute promo for next week, and then we'll open up for questions. So as we always do, everybody, if you're not yet actively supporting AJA, make sure after this event you go to the website, jewishassociation.org.au. You can be a supporter. Make sure you like and follow our social media, such as the Facebook page, Twitter, Instagram, and be on the email list. Now, next week, if you're after political correctness, miss a week, because we have the Australian Director for the Centre of the Study of Political Islam International. That's an international organisation. And given what we've seen happen in Israel, as well as on the streets locally, we're going to have a proper discussion on the influence and role of political Islam. Not many Jewish organisations would do such a topic, Julie, but we will.
Good for you.
Robert, if you want to jump in and administer the question time, that'd be great.
Yeah, and we should also say our guest for next week is with us tonight. I saw him at the Zoom event, so welcome. I look forward to next week. All right, first guest is Marilyn. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? All right, we might come back to you in a minute. Let's go to Leon. Would you like
unmuted?
Okay. Go for it.
I'm a long-time inveterate Dennis Prager, Dennis and Julie noted, timeless acolyte. And Julie, when you described your journey towards conservatism, you said that you had lost many, if not most, of your friends. My question to you is, with the passage of time, have some or any of those friends been swayed by your convictions and re-established their relationships with you? And the second thing I wanted to say or ask is, you are a young, white, non-Jewish, conservative, Harvard graduate. You've become somewhat of a celebrity, raised your head above the parapet. And obviously, it's inevitable that you're going to be subject to hateful journalism and social media. Do you feel that you have the mettle to roll with the punches without being swayed in terms of your morality and your convictions?
Okay.
The last thing.
Well, two questions. Good.
Okay.
Well, first of all, Marilyn, thank you so much for your kind words and for watching the show. I'm delighted that you do so and that you enjoy it. I'll be quick because I know that there are some other individuals with questions, but as far as the friends question, yes, it is true that when I announced my conservatism, and from the get-go, I was very public about it, I did lose some friends, and that was immensely painful. Those 2 weeks that I was first on Dennis's show, and again, kind of came out of the closet, if you will, with my conservatism, were the hardest weeks of my life. And I look back on them and I feel so sad for me because I was so miserable, but I'm so glad that I went through that period because it made me so much stronger and it really showed me who my real friends are. And it was kind of the greatest blessing because it was like the best filter of people in my life. I know who supports me. I know who doesn't support me. And at 22, now 24 years old, that is really a gift that early on, even though it comes with a lot of pain to have that. As far as friends that may have come around, interestingly, in the wake of October 7th, I have had some old friends who've reached out to me and they haven't explicitly, said that they now agree with me or that they have been influenced by my thought. I don't know if they have, but I've noticed that some of them have reached out to me. And frankly, most of them are Jewish Democrats who I think are really repulsed by this anti-Semitism. And I think they're starting to see that the whole DEI, intersectionality, woke movement has facilitated this kind of rancid hatred that they hate. So it's unfortunate that it's taken this, but yes. And then just very fast, as far as can I handle the hate? I think losing my friends and being so public at the beginning really kind of gave me the thick skin to carry on. And I have to tell you that I've never been as motivated and as redoubled in my determination to save Western civilization as I am now, especially in the wake of this attack. So I feel strong and great. And you know what? If people on the left hate me and they are smearing me, then I'm doing something right. Because the day that they approve of me, I must have lost my mind.
That's a very true message. It also applies to us, to AJ as well. So yeah,
100%.
Yeah, very, very strong person. All right, Leon, would you like to ask your question?
Given the egregiousness of the barbarity of Hamas, do you think the public should be reminded that the Palestinian Authority, or the PLO, who are often portrayed as the so-called moderates, have as their final solution also the obliteration of Israel? This is evidenced, of course, by their constant refusal to accept the two-state illusion and in their so-called education system, which is anti-Semitic and not just anti-Zionist.
I'm so sorry. I had a bit of difficulty hearing you. Would someone mind just synopsizing the question?
Sure. I think the question was about, given how egregious Hamas's terrorism was, what about the Palestinian Authority? Shouldn't we be reminding their manifesto is very anti-Semitic? It calls for the destruction of Israel and their education system.
So sorry. So the question is, should we be reminded that the Palestinian Authority has this kind of anti-Semitism in their charter and in their education system? Is that? I just want to make sure I heard it correctly.
I think that was correct. Yeah, should the public be reminded about that in the world? Because we hear some people talking about bringing them to govern Gaza.
Right. I mean, of course. I mean, the public should be made aware of all of the rancid anti-Semitism, not just only in Hamas, but in the Palestinian Authority. But the sad thing is, even if they are made aware, I don't think it'll make a difference in their opinion. And I'm sorry to sound somber and depressing, but I also am not going to patronize anyone or ignore a reality. So we have a far greater issue here than just educating people about the PLO, the PA, Hamas. This is a cultural rot. This is a moral, spiritual disease that needs a far greater healing.
We might go to some people we don't often hear from. Maybe Gary, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
My question is more the situation I find myself in, as some sort of state of fear. Reading of the Holocaust, I remember reading some people, the fear they felt was the silence of their neighbours when signs went up, no Jews on this park seat, no Jews in this shop. I'm dealing with a range of events that some related to Jewish affairs, like I'm trustee of a historic Jewish cemetery, just had 2 days of intense meetings where everyone knew I was Jewish, council people, cultural historians, but no one mentioned a thing. And I'm in fear that people will mention it. I don't know how I would react, and I'm in fear they won't mention it. Does it mean nothing to them? So that's my question. I imagine a lot of other people are going through something of that same emotional experience as well. That fear about the silence and fear that someone will speak about it and how will we react.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And although I'm not Jewish, I share your fear, of course, not to the same extent because I'm not Jewish, but I want you to know I share it. There are more forces for evil right now in the world than there are for good. I recently wrote an article in the Epoch Times, and then I wrote kind of a part 2 article in the American Mind about how I think that China and Russia may have acted alongside Iran in supporting Hamas in the October 7th attack on Israel. And then that's a part 2 meeting with AJA. That's a long kind of discussion to get into, but I encourage you to read my articles. And then in the part 2 of the article, I talked about Turkey and how President Erdogan has given these speeches praising Hamas as liberators and calling Israel a war criminal. And so what can I say? I understand your fear. And there, as I said, there are more forces for evil than there are for good. And you asked a question, do they care? Does it mean anything to them? The answer is no. The answer is no. People don't care about the plight of the Jews. I mean, it's staggering. And by the way, of course, there are some who do. I mean, there was just a march in Washington the other day. I don't want to just sound too doomsday and despair too much. There was just a march in Washington, D.C., our capital here, where I believe it was like 20,000 people marched for Israel. So there is some hope. But there was a Jewish man knocked over at a protest here in Los Angeles, and he died. There was a head of a synagogue, a female here in the United States, who was stabbed for being Jewish. And the mainstream media yawned. They barely, if at all, reported on it. And let me tell you, I'm sure many of you remember that when George Floyd died, you know, in the custody of an American police officer, the whole country was essentially burned down. Institutions were changed, corporations were changed, education codes were changed to teach students about the death of George Floyd. It is despicable and disgusting beyond belief to see the double standard. People just yawn. When Putin invaded Ukraine, you know, Ukraine flags were all over, including in the yard of Harvard during Black Lives Matter banners. And then the days after October 7th, no Israel banner. And so again, I'm sorry to be so blunt, but this is an evil that we have to acknowledge.
Yep, 100% agree. We've got a lot of questions. We might try to go to a couple of new people we don't usually hear.
Okay.
Dean Razel, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you. I'd like you to comment on the arrogance of the world nations, the Western nations. True, Israel is less than 1/10 the size of the state of Victoria, where I live. Jews make up 0.2% of the world population, but nevertheless, Israel is a democratic, modern, Western, you would say, nation. And yet all these big leaders, honchos, think they can come and tell Israel what they've got to do, including the US, how they've got to manage this afterwards, assuming that the Israelis aren't discussing this deeply and intensively amongst themselves. Do you have any comment as to how the Jews of the world, how Israelis can possibly cope with that?
It's difficult because I understand what you're saying, that you know, outside nations shouldn't necessarily instruct Israel how to govern and what to do. It's been amazing to see in the United States before October 7th, when all of those protests were happening in Israel against Netanyahu's judicial reforms. It was so amazing to me to see like everyday Americans have such a strong opinion about Netanyahu one way or the other. And of course, I'm a free speech absolutist. You are allowed to have an opinion, but the certainty with which certain Americans condemned Netanyahu or supported Netanyahu, but especially those who condemned Netanyahu, my question for them was like, how can you judge? I mean, until rockets are falling on you, until you're living in Israel, you make Aliyah and go live there, then you can judge who the Israelis vote into power. So I understand that. I will say, however, if Israel is accepting American aid, and we should provide it to them, then I do think that the United States has a role in not, putting a heavy-handed fist down and telling Israel exactly what to do, but sort of voicing their opinion and maybe working with the government towards a solution in general. I just wish that American government was not the Biden administration and it was the Trump administration. But still, I think that Israel, again, if they are accepting aid, it's just the reality that they are going to have to work with some of these Western governments and hear their opinions.
Okay, I think we might only have time for a couple more questions. We'll try and make them very brief. Mr. Cohen, could you ask your question?
Thank you, and thank you, Julie, for your comments on the students of America. But essentially, the Enlightenment left us with Western civilization and its values, and we relied on the universities to be teaching those values and within those values. But it seems that the major part of those values was religion and the primacy of family, the family unit. And it appears that all the universities, there are two things that are being ditched. And therefore,
let's get to your question.
Do you think that plays a role?
Oh my gosh. I mean, absolutely. I think that your observation is astute. I know that I keep shouting out timeless episodes, but I interviewed again, I think this week. It's hard to keep track of when I recorded and when things aired, but I interviewed an author, Melissa Kearney, here in the United States. She's a professor and she wrote a book called Two-Parent Privilege. And it profiled the demise and the collapse of the nuclear family here in the United States. And it has just been staggering to see that data. And also, as someone who recently graduated from college, there's this sense on college campuses that, acknowledging that two-parent households are the ideal is somehow bigoted and somehow unkind and unfair to single mothers. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up, because as I said at the beginning of this discussion, all of these things are pieces of a puzzle. And some of you may be listening and thinking, okay, I agree that, to the collapse of the nuclear family is a problem, but what does this have to do with Israel? Well, to your point, this, there has been such a collapse in the social fabric that holds society together: Judeo-Christian values, respect for the rule of law, respect for our constitutional freedoms, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the sense that we judge people based on their moral merit, based on their actions, based on who they are as individuals and not whatever immutable characteristics they possess. The collapse of the center of society, which inculcates these moral values, the nuclear family. So this is all part of, again, the the edifice of extremism and entitlement. When all of these individual things collapse, then we shouldn't be shocked when we see this outcome of rancid anti-Semitism and radicalism among our youth. And sadly, not just our youth.
Yeah, all right. I think the last question, apologies to everyone else. Rachel, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Julie, and for your astute and incredible commentary tonight. I wanted to actually comment on what you said about, interestingly, I was going to ask the question, what on earth is the US doing giving 6 billion, I think you said 6 billion to Iran? What do they honestly expect Iran is going to do with $6 billion, and how can they even afford to in light of what they used up during COVID? But then you later made a comment that Israel, in light of the fact that she accepts funding by the US, should therefore be in a position to take instruction from the US, in other words, but whatever you said. So does that mean Iran is going to take instruction from the US in, in light of $6 billion gift from the US for nothing? I don't even get it. Apropos of what does the US give Iran, a terrorist entity, $6 billion? Oh, you're muted.
Oh.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll keep it quick because I know that we're nearing the end, but I'm really glad that you brought this up, because I just want to explain for 30 seconds what this whole Iran transfer was about, because there's a lot of confusion surrounding it. And when people talk about it, people will swiftly step in to correct them if they're wrong. So what the Biden administration would argue, and what they have argued in the wake of October 7th, is that there was no direct transfer from the United States of $6 billion to Iran. What happened was, there was, from my understanding, is that there was $6 billion of assets that the government of South Korea owed to Iran for oil sales. We, the United States, convinced South Korea, our ally, to freeze it so that we could use that money as diplomatic leverage against Iran. And so what happened was, there were 5, I believe, American hostages in Iran, and the Biden administration decided, in exchange for releasing those hostages, they would unfreeze that money. And what happened was, that money went from South Korea to Qatar. And this is really important. The money was transferred from South Korea to Qatar, where there it was unfrozen. And so Qatar is the new kind of intermediary, where Qatar is in charge of doling out the money to the Iranian regime. So this is a very deft kind of situation, because it's not money going from the United States to B, Iran. It's money going from the United States to B, South Korea, to C, Qatar, and then Qatar doles it out to Iran. And so when the Biden administration after October 7th says, oh, well, there was no direct transfer, Iran isn't getting the money, it's misrepresenting the picture. Now that the money is out of South Korea's hands and into Qatar's hands, and Qatar is an ally of Iran, Qatar can dole out that money at will. Nothing the Biden administration can do can stop Qatar from doing that. So sorry for a little bit of the history lesson, if you will, but I just did all this reading on this to try to understand it. And we have to have our facts straight in order to effectively argue about all of these issues. So I'm glad you brought that up. And I wish the Iranian regime would accept American instruction. But again, I wish it would not be coming from the Biden administration.
100%. Yeah, so basically terror supporters in Qatar are in charge of money going to terror supporters in Iran. So disaster all around. But thanks for the explanation. I think after tonight, we can say there's hope for the future. So thank you very much, Julie. It was an excellent talk. Very inspiring, very good for everyone to hear, and a range of topics. How can everyone keep up to date with your shows and your writings?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. As I said, it's now past 2 a.m. here, but it's a testament to all of you how energized I am at this early hour. I've been so looking forward to this, and I thank all of you for your graciousness, and my prayers are with you and your families and your friends. And to answer your question, you can find me on YouTube the Julie Hartman YouTube channel. You can catch Dennis and Julie, my show with Dennis Prager, on that channel, as well as my own show, Timeless with Julie Hartman. And then I do these separate Julie noted news videos. There's one on Iran and the transference of money, if my explanation was too fast and nonsensical and you care to watch it. And you can follow me on Instagram at Julie R. Hartman. And finally, my email is julie@julie-hartman.com. I would love to hear from any of you. It's my favorite part of my job, hearing from people with whom I speak. So thank you very much again to all of you.
Thank you so much. And I saw for the people who have their videos on, a few people writing down with pens. So I think you'll expect some communications or some new followers.
Yes, I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much for an excellent talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Everyone, please, we'll put a link to the AJA website if you haven't yet subscribed to our emails or become a member. If you want to donate or support AJA, for sure. We're working very long hours now with the war on, lots of new expenses, hopefully taking on a new person. So yeah, follow AJA on all the social media. Look forward to next week's topic, which very important topic, radical Islam. Obviously, everyone can see how important it is. So thank you so much and have a good night, everyone.